Hi everyone. This week we're going to talk about formal reports. These are longer documents and they're not as easy to scan for content as the other items that we've been looking at. Of course, these are going to require some different kinds of navigational aids. So with these we're going to be including a table of contents. They're going to include lists of tables and figures. We're going to add a title page for aesthetics and for easy identification. Of course, opinions vary, but at 10 pages you should use formal report conventions. Formal reports also make a report look better and, of course, make them look more formal, and they show more respect for the recipient. And you also want to make sure that you use formal conventions even for shorter reports if you want them to impress external clients or anyone else. So if you're going to have a longer document, go ahead and use that formal report just to be on the safe side and to make sure that you're making a good impression. Since we're going to do a formal report, this will walk you through all the different parts of the formal report. So if you are in the stages of writing it, or if you think you're done, or both, it'd be a good idea to listen to the lecture and go through and make sure you've got these complete. So, letter of transmittal, title page, summary, table of contents, list of tables and figures, introduction, discussion, conclusion, recommendations, glossary, references, and appendices. You may or may not have some of these sections just simply because they may or may not be relevant to what you're doing. Keep in mind, relevant as far as your audience goes, relevant as far as whether or not you have a need for an appendix or appendices in your paper. Everyone should have references, definitely. May or may not need a glossary, but everyone should have some tables or figures and the rest of the items. So your letter of transmittal. Most people probably are not familiar with this particular piece. This is a courtesy to the recipient, and it's really intended just for them. It gives privileged information that the recipient might appreciate, but it doesn't really go in the main report. It's more of just kind of like a little note, but slightly more formal. It says what the writer would say in person when handing over a report. So, purpose and authorization of the report, gives the main conclusions and some helpful hints for interpreting in the report, and then the acknowledgments and friendly close. So, here's the letter of transmittal. Feel free to pause and read through it, or if you're following along in your book, I believe it's in there. So here you see that we use correct letter format. You want to make sure that you use the attention to detail. Make sure that's necessary. You want to make sure that you use that because it is definitely a sign of professionalism. Here you see that the report contacts purpose and authorization. Dear Jeff, I've enclosed the report on the investigation you asked us to conduct on the production problems at Pinnacle Manufacturing. So hey, I didn't just go and do this on my own. Here in the next paragraph, you see the thanks and acknowledgement. We want to thank your staff members, Janet and Brendan, for helping us put together the metrics for your production department. Their help was invaluable. Chief results or outcomes very briefly. Recommendations focus on small changes. Don't feel it would be necessary to reorganize. Please see page 73 for specific recommendations. You want to pause and take a look. So here, information useful to the reader but not appropriate in the report. So here, Fred is communicating, found part of the problem with the production actually stems from personality conflicts. This isn't something that they necessarily want to include, but feel it's important to communicate. So this is a good place for that. And then standard friendly close, generally an offer to help interpret the report and to do more work in the future. Next we have the title page. you want to include the following information on it: the title of the report, name and title of the recipient or the primary reader, the name and title of the writer or the authoring organization, the date of completion, and you want to take care to design the title page attractively. So make sure you center the information on the page. You could be a little creative with it. Acknowledgments. So this would go to people or organizations who have helped in the production of the report, generally by providing information or granting access to resources. These are a courtesy. They're not a legal requirement, but in text citations for specific information, you do need to have those. Those are a requirement. Those are covered in Chapter 9. Acknowledgments are generally placed on a page by themselves right after the title page, and they're not considered part of the report itself. It's kind of like a dedications page in a book, just kind of a thank you to the people who helped me. And then you have disclaimers. Legal disclaimers, those are statements that limit the writer's liability, generally by clarifying that the writer is not personally responsible for the accuracy of some of the information contained in the report. The language is obviously going to be very legalistic, and the wording is generally drafted by lawyers. You're probably going to use materials provided by your company's legal department or taken from the internet. These are usually placed on a page by themselves right after the title page. They're not really part of the report itself. So there you have a little sample of what some of that will be. Feel free to either try your hand at writing disclaimers or going out and finding a sample out there for your particular type of writing. Just make sure it is appropriate and in line. Obviously, none of us are writing true, legitimate proposals of any type. We're not really going to be submitting these anywhere, so you're not in any true legal danger. I'm not going to turn this in and try anything and sue you, so your legal risk is non-existent. The next section you have is the summary. So this is placed either directly after the title page and the subsequent disclaimers and acknowledgments, or immediately before the introduction. So we're going to have this right before the introduction. The purpose is to give a highly condensed version of the report. And you want to think about it as being a second version of the same report. The reader should understand the most important content of the report simply by reading the summary. You want to focus the summary on the context. So that's how it came to be written, the purpose and the scope. The methodology, which is very brief. Show that you did your due diligence. Focus on your report findings and recommendations. It should be no more than 1/10 the length of the rest of the report. So, however many pages, 1/10 of that. If readers want to or need to know more, they can read the appropriate sections of the report. So the introduction, discussions, conclusions, recommendations. Keep in mind too some things that I should not find in your summaries. No quoted material or anything like that. That's not the place for that. So here's a sample of a summary. Here you see the background. This is your report, purpose, and authorization. Here's your methodology and organization. It's very brief. So as you can see, this is kept to a sentence. Next, you have your chief conclusions and recommendations. Again, these are super brief. We've got maybe 5 or 6 sentences here. Then you're moving into an abstract, and you're probably thinking to yourself, like, what's the difference between an abstract and a summary? And there are differences. So with the abstract, there are 2 kinds of summaries. There's either an executive or a descriptive. Executive summaries contain conclusions and recommendations on the basis of which readers can make executive decisions about the conduct of business. Descriptive summaries describe what the document contains, kind of like a prose table of contents, and it generally doesn't include specific facts or findings. So it functions more as a tool for researchers to figure out what kind of information a document contains. So at this point in your collegiate careers, I'm sure you've done enough research to know what an abstract looks like. These are the ones that you're probably familiar with, the more descriptive abstracts. Those are more similar to the summary, but summary contains more information than a descriptive abstract. So this is almost like a summary pulled apart. The descriptive part would be part of the summary, and the executive part would be another part. So descriptive is just simply nuts and bolts. It's the context, it's a little bit of methodology. It's like any other abstract you've written for any other paper. This article talks about this. You may mention the main sources that you discussed, but again, it's not going to be very long. It's not going to go into a lot of detail. It's going to be highlights mainly, whereas the executive summary is exactly as they said, recommendations on the basis in which executive decisions can be made. So here's an example. This talks about the content of the documents, doesn't include specific facts or findings. This article describes current trends, so on and so forth. And oftentimes there are keywords at the end. Keep in mind too, your abstract, again, is not very long. It is roughly about a paragraph. Moving on, table of contents and list of table and figures. So your your table of contents helps your readers to see the report organization at a glance and find the information that they seek. List of tables and figures helps readers find helpful technical illustrations and tables. Word will auto-generate those for you if you apply heading styles to all headings and caption styles to all graphics. For accessibility purposes, it would be a good idea to learn how to use these features now, because with industry standards being what they are as far as accessibility goes, it doesn't hurt. If you're curious on how to do that, I would suggest going to YouTube and watching the videos on accessibility, seeing if you can locate those. I might see if I can find them for you and post them, but definitely look and see if you can figure out how to do that, but it's not terribly complicated. Next, you want to move into your introduction. So this is also called context in shorter reports. It gives the same kind of information that you know from your other reports. It's the purpose of the report, scope of your project, the context about how the report came to be written and how it fits into the conduct of business of the authoring organization. And then it gives the description of the research methodology or the report organization, usually the same thing. Here's your sample. And as you can see in the first paragraph, you have the context or authorization on how the report came to be written. There's your purpose and your scope. And here's your method, kind of like a prose outline. Then we're going to move into the discussion. The discussion section is the longest part of the report. It could run into the hundreds of pages. As you well know, your report should not run into the hundreds of pages. If it runs into the hundreds of pages, I'm not sure what report you're writing, but it is not the one I assigned. So please reread the assignment and email me or something, because you've definitely done something way different than what I asked. And this will detail exactly how you went about investigating the content of the report and exactly what you found. Proves your due diligence, it shows your full calculations, and gives your tables of information and everything else. Unfortunately, few people will read the full report. Mainly, they'll look for information of particular interest or relevance to them. If you haven't figured it out, this is the body of the report. Organization of the discussion, of course, depends on the type of report. So you want to use the same structures described for informal reports over in Chapter 6. Because really, formal reports are just much longer versions of informal reports. There's just extra parts to them that we've been talking about. And next we're going to move into conclusions. So conclusions are the findings you've come to. And these are and this is the key word here, conclusions are the facts that you've unearthed in your research. The discussion section is very long, and these facts are peppered throughout. The conclusion section provides a convenient end summary of all the relevant facts and findings of the discussion section. These findings are often listed. So here's a sample. Sorry, it's kind of small, maybe a little challenging to read. Next, there are recommendations. So, conclusions are incontrovertible facts. You have done your due diligence and you can prove your conclusions. Recommendations are the opinions about what should happen next. So these are your opinions. Recommendations are specific actions you think they should take. The recommendation should arise naturally from the conclusions. So, here are some examples of recommendations based off of the conclusions we just saw. Next, we have the glossary, which is just like the glossary that you're familiar with. You want to define the technical terms in the report, and you want to use parenthetical definitions in the text. So our tests show high levels of carcinogens, cancer-causing agents, in the samples. If the definitions are too long, or if not all readers require the definitions, you want to define the terms in a glossary. So you can bold the word, or you can put an asterisk next to it. You can indicate in a footnote, less commonly parenthetically, that the bolded or asterisked word are defined in the glossary. Bolded words are defined, or so on. In the glossary, list all the terms alphabetically. So just indicate, hey, this is why this is like this. There's a glossary. You can look it up. And here's what your glossary will look like. Remember who your audience is and what words you will need to define. Next is your references section. Remember, everyone will have a references section. A references section lists all the sources of information on which you drew upon in the writing of the report. Double check Chapter 9, References and Citations, for more information. You still need to reference this no matter what. Appendices. This contains proofs and evidence that are too long for the body of the report, where it would disrupt the flow of reading too much. So this might be pages of calculations or test results, corroborating reports or journal articles, material safety data sheets, site plans, schematics, or flow charts, specification documents, competing quotes from potential suppliers. So each discrete individual item should go in its own appendix. You want to provide titles for all appendices so that they are listed in the table of contents so the reader knows that they're there. For example, Appendix C, electrical wiring schematic. Also indicate to the reader in the text that the information is to be found in the appendices. The electrical wiring schematic, Appendix C, shows so on and so forth. And the formal report should be paginated in a particular way. And what that means is, this isn't a section of the report, this is how it should be numbered. The actual report starts with the introduction. So the context and short reports. All the other elements are aids to navigation, so that means they help readers find their way to specific parts of the report and get to important information more quickly. Because the beginning section, or the orientation section, isn't part of the report itself and is created after the completion of the report, it's paginated differently. The lowercase Roman numerals will be paginated at the bottom center, and the Arabic numerals should go to the top left of the page, usually. So take a look at the sample paper and double check the assignment instructions, and you should be good to go. As always, reach out if you have any questions, and have a good week.